Welcome to Truth and Transcendence. You can find all our other episodes on truthandtranscendence.com. This one is for managers and leaders and directors out there who sometimes call meetings. I was chatting with someone the other day and I was reminded of something, a principle which I learned when I was doing executive coaching full time. And this was to do with meetings. And in fact, I'd like to acknowledge one of my past clients who was a perfect example of what I'm going to talk about today. This guy, he was a CEO. When I first met him, he was a divisional director in a large bank. He subsequently moved on and became chief exec of a large national institution. And he moved on from there and became a chairman of something else. And he was a very, very successful leader, really successful, both in terms of the bottom line, but also in terms of the actual growth of the businesses, and also in terms of recognizing when it was time to wind a business down and doing so safely and securely. So he wasn't just one of these growth addicts. He was actually a very balanced, pragmatic, and effective leader in the corporate world. And I discovered one of the reasons he was so successful was because of the way that he actually managed doing meetings. Now, I don't mean what was his style of running meetings. I'm talking about his decision-making process about whether or not to have a meeting and what to include in the meeting and what not to include. And the clue for this was that he had an understanding of human capital, in the sense that he understood that people's time was an asset, people's goodwill was an asset, people's energy was an asset, and there were many other assets that were directly related back to human beings, above and beyond people's effort and work performance. These slightly less tangible aspects of humans, he recognized those as assets from a business perspective, but he also recognized those as having value and worth from a moral and human and principled perspective. And he had genuinely had respect for it. So he understood that the way those assets were utilized and called on made business sense. He also had a strong guiding principle around relating with those aspects of the humans in his organization from a place of deep respect and consideration, because that actually fitted, that aligned with his personal principles. So you might think, well, this guy's completely unique. Well, he was unique in his own way, but there are lots and lots of leaders who have those two aspects around human capital, the pragmatic and the, if you like, spiritual aspect of it. One of the ways this showed up with this particular guy was if he wanted to get a decision made in a meeting, whether he was the chair of the meeting or whether he was, whether someone else was chairing the meeting and he was a member of the meeting, if he wanted to get a decision made and genuinely everybody in the room, that their agreement to it was genuinely important, not just lip service, he realized that the best way to interface with that was to go and see everybody individually prior to the meeting, over the, let's say, 2 weeks prior to the meeting, and with each person explain the decision he was hoping that would be made and why he thought it was a good idea, answer all of their questions, give them all of the information. And actually, because he was a very savvy businessman, his ideas were usually very good. Every now and again, there was one work that needed a bit of modification, but this also was a great way to get that to happen, because he could, in a conversation with somebody, say, you made a really good point. I'm just going to modify it slightly in this way. What do you think of that? And then when the meeting happened, other people, when they were putting their ideas forward in the meeting to be discussed and agreed, there would potentially be these long, protracted discussions about whatever it was, exhausting, time-consuming, and a bit of a waste of time. Whereas my friend, he would come in and say, great, well, this is about the decision about this, that, and the other. I feel there are these options. This is my preferred option. I'd just like to ask what everyone in the room thinks. Immediately, everyone would say, yeah, I'm really fully aware of this and fully briefed, and actually, I agree with you. Or, no, actually, I don't agree with you, and this is why, and we've discussed it, and we understand it. But I understand if the vote goes that way, I'll get behind it. Because I've been consulted. Because I've been considered. My ideas have been considered. And I recognize I'm not going to agree with everything that we do collectively. Now, that way of doing it was, some people would call that manipulative. And maybe it is. I mean, it is savvy, it's smart. It's a great way to get your own way. But actually, I think the reason it worked was because people felt respected, because they were respected, and their time was not being wasted. And it meant each person could actually discuss the thing with him in their own way, in their own time, and focus on their questions and their concerns about it, and not have to sit there listening to everybody going through that ad infinitum. So you might then say, well, surely there are times when you need to get everybody together in order to get a consensus, because people need to hear what each other has to say. So that's an example of really what I'm driving at here, which is, if you've got a situation where something needs to be discussed and a consensus reached, and there's a genuine value and importance with everybody hearing everyone else's point of view, genuinely, not just because you found somewhere in a manual that is a good idea and leaders are supposed to do that, but because genuinely it's actually a creative discussion. It's actually one where everybody needs to hear everyone else's point of view, because together those points of view can build upon one another to reach an outcome that is greater than the sum of the parts. That then becomes a reason to have a meeting. Because what you're trying to do there is something that can only be done with everybody in the room. It cannot be done the other way. Now, some people try and do this by email, by kind of email thread, or if there's some sort of online forum that people use. And actually that can be effective as well. So if that can be effective, and if that's just as effective, that might be a more respectful, better use of time, better use of energy than doing it in the room. So that's a whole piece of discrimination for you, dear leader, when you're considering it and saying, okay, is this something where everyone needs to be in the room? Because the physical presence of everybody in the room, hearing and responding in the moment and hearing the responses and discussing it is the creative process that we now need? Or is it something where we can just literally do it in an email thread? Is it something that's simple enough for that, where the sort of energetic nuances of it are not part of it? In which case, maybe we do it that way. So one time I had a group of clients who, again, they were running a large organization, and they used to have these management kind of presentation forum meetings several times a year. And I used to go in and sit in the back and witness these and then discuss them with my clients and, give feedback, and they would share how they felt about it, and we would discuss it. And one time after one of these, I spoke to my client and I said, okay, I've just got a request for you. So what's that? I said, please don't ever ask me to sit in on one of these ever again. I'm literally climbing the walls inside my own head because they are so tedious. They are so time heavy. You've probably heard of death by PowerPoint. This is what was going on. And they'd made an effort to change the way they were doing these meetings to make them much more expansive, much more interesting, much more involving, much more engaging. But actually, they were still trying to do things in those big sessions, which should have been done another way. So in other words, they were not utilizing the human capital in a way that was pragmatically and economically sensible and productive and effective, and also not respectful to the time and the energy and the goodwill of those people. So they said, okay, great, let's take some time away from the office and actually rework how we're going to do this. So we did. And I said, do you think you can do one of these days with only 4 slides? You think you can do it with 4 slides instead of 40? And they said, well, we won't be able to convey much information that way. And I said, why are you using these meetings to convey information? Information can be conveyed much more easily, and it's much easier for people just to read it and, maybe, email you or call you and ask a question than to have to sit there being barraged by these slides all day. Well, then why do we want to get people together? Why, indeed, do you want to get people together? Well, the whole thing's supposed to be motivational. We want to get people's point of view. Great, so design it for that. Don't design it for passing over information. Yeah, but, us standing up and communicating the information to people shows that we care and shows that we're present. Yes, it does. And that is heavily masked by the fact that they are bored, rigid with it. That's not good for what you're trying to do. So we did. They did redesign it, and they did some kind of practice and rehearsals, and they completely transformed how they were doing these large presentation meetings, and they became much more effective. People really enjoyed them a lot more. Actually, information flow really improved because they were working out ways of passing information around the organization that were much smoother, much easier for people to deal with. And then the meetings were used for actual human connection. And when there was something that really needed everyone to get together and have a creative working session around something, the energy for that was much more present. And it was much more effective. So if you are someone who calls meetings and runs meetings, maybe you already follow all of these principles that I'm talking about, in which case your organization is probably really effective and you can feel really good about yourself. And maybe you can teach this to some of your people down the line. Or maybe you can teach this to people in your peer group. Maybe you're in a peer group with other directors, and maybe you can pass this on to them, because this is really crucial information. We are so meeting heavy in our corporate world. And it's one of the reasons people find it such a deadening culture sometimes. It's just really, really not necessary. So I hope you found that useful and interesting. And if you're not a leader, then maybe it's not directly relevant to you, but maybe you can also consider, if you're calling people together in a group, are you doing it for a reason which is actually appropriate to it being a group? Or would it be better if you chat with people one-to-one, or do something one-to-one with people, or send an email? What's actually the way to do it that is time effective and respectful, spiritually respectful to the energies and the space and the goodwill of the people involved? So thank you for listening, and thank you for watching. If you haven't already checked out my brand new website, freedomofspirit.world, please go and have a look. Every single visit, however brief, helps with the algorithm and is very gratefully received. This new website features all of the offerings within the Freedom of Spirit Kaleidoscope, which I'm very excited about. So do go and have a look. Thanks again. Have a fantastic week, and I'll see you next time.